I was in Arizona a couple of months ago, as well as to rustle up James White and continue our spread of information to the United States, all over the United States, about false teachers and the doctrines that they're promoting, that if they're wondering if somebody will answer it, we certainly will take the challenge. And so we have Joh Jennings up in Philadelphia, who has agreed to debate. We have James White, who's not willing to. And so Caleb had a debate this past week with another individual all the way from Arkansas. And you might ask the question, why are these people in Philadelphia and in Arkansas and the different places, why are they interested in debating, and how did they even hear of us? Can I tell you the way they heard of us? They have a YouTube channel, and it's been my goal throughout the years with the channel, just basically let it promote itself. We do local work, we get on television, we end up mixing it up with all kinds of different people of disbeliefs and trying to get them to put away their ideas that are not, you can't follow the Bible to find them. And so as a result, people have gotten to the point where they tell their friends and neighbors about these folk that are on television, open up the phone lines, and all kinds of crazy folk, regular folk, interested folk call in, and ultimately they hear about people that are obeying the gospel. Here, California, Arizona, Florida, just all kinds of different places. We have visiting with us this morning people from Maryland, and I basically are about to say some of them are regulars, and then New Jersey, and I might be missing somebody that I'm looking for. So this morning, the reason I have Caleb up here is we just returned from Nashville. Caleb had an interview with a very well-known author named F. That's his initial. That's his book title, F. LaGard Smith, L-A-G-A-R-D. If you want to look him up, he has some really interesting books. For one, he has a chronological Bible that is a bestseller in Europe, and it is. I haven't seen it. Caleb has a copy of it, and I definitely am going to get a copy because of the way he has done some of the things. He's a lawyer out of Oregon and Washington State. He was 20-something years as a professor professor of law at Pepperdine University, Seavers College in Malibu. He's been a professor, also a resident scholar at David Lipscomb College in Nashville, and he saw some of the interviews that Caleb has done with former president of Rochester College. He heard about an interview that Caleb just did with a professor that he knew from one of the colleges that he worked in, and he basically wanted to get on and have himself be interviewed. And so, why are all these people lining up that don't even like each other and are not necessarily associated with us? As I mentioned, it's the appeal of the YouTube channel, which gets its basis, and I believe its motivation, God's motivation to spread it out, is because we're doing local work rather than running all over the place doing invitations and lectures and things of that nature. We just stay here with the regular folk, and that's what we're doing this morning, is we're trying to talk to regular folk. This will go out on YouTube as well. Why Caleb again? So when we're coming from Nashville, he told me that he was having an infusion on Monday. And so the last thing I want is for him to look like this again. And you might say, well, he doesn't look so bad. Well, I thought he had my suit coat on in 2018. It tells when that was, May 2018. And then I began to realize he was sick and maybe weighed 150 pounds, less than that. And so we don't want him looking like that again. And so I said to him, I'll preach this morning, and then I'll do television tonight. And so make sure that you be praying for him tomorrow. We don't want him to have a relapse of any kind. He's doing fine now, but we are definitely loaded up with our schedule. This is the second interview in a month, I believe. And then he had a debate on November the 3rd, and it really used all of our resources as far as the energy is concerned. And so that's one of the things we're going to be talking about this morning. Y'all, it really amazes me the ideas that people decide to use, to come up with when they see an event in the Bible, and I'm saying it really, when you think of the doctrines that you possibly have heard of, and you say, how did they come up with that? And you might say, why did I not see that? And I wonder if I ever would have seen that if, if I had just, had the wherewithal to be looking at this particular instance. Caleb brought up just now during the Lord's Supper that Jesus was saying, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I don't know what you think about when you read that, but I'm saying, y'all, this is very, very unbelievable. You just had people that you came to, and anything that possibly could be done, you did for them. And they hail you on the one hand as you spend time in their midst, but other individuals are trying to get rid of you, and they ultimately kill him. And then he says, Father, forgive them. And you have two thieves on the cross with him, and one of them is railing, and the other has been basically considering the whole business. And look at this. What do you think when you see the thief on the cross and that Jesus says this to him? Verily I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. Do you think, boy, that's my ticket? What do you mean my ticket? Yeah, that's what I thought too. When you hear people that are saying such a thing, it's like, what? What ticket? Did I miss something? Do you know what people use this verse for? Get out of jail before I die. We have people all the time that when we're trying to encourage them to realize, look at the mercy and the kindness and the goodness that is displayed in this passage. Jesus forgiving all these other people. Jesus saying to the thief, today you shall be with me in paradise. And I'm going to take that and say, you know what? I'm going to wait till my deathbed. And that's what preachers are telling them when they argue with us on television. They basically say, no, what are you going to do about the person on the deathbed that didn't have a chance to be baptized is the main thing. It's like these people got a phobia of water. And our answer is that the only chance that they ever had was once they got dead in the hospital? And what would you do in COVID, during COVID time frame? You're sure not going to get a chance during COVID. They're not going to let anybody in to even minister to you. So, who would have come up with such an idea? Well, it is amazing. That's what I'm saying. And so this morning, we're actually going to look at another one that, I hope this sets the stage for you because, you may be a person that used to believe in the thief on the cross as your ticket not to have to do anything. Or if you happen to die before you've done anything, well, the thief on the cross, all he had to do is say, and on your, as the plane comes down and you're on your way to crashing, you're going to pray, remember me when you come in your kingdom. And you expect Jesus to say, today, thou shalt be with me in paradise. Well, I can tell you what, I don't know what Jesus is going to say to you. I don't know what Jesus is going to say to anybody. That's the whole point of this lesson. But look at this. Here's a passage in Ephesians chapter 2. And, just look at it. And you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sin, where in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, among whom all these disobedient folk that are following the prince of the power of the air, walking in the course of the world, among whom also we all had our conversation in times past in the lust of the flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath as others. But God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us, even when we were dead in sins, hath quickened us together with Christ. By grace are you saved, and have raised us up together to make us sit together in heavenly places in Jesus Christ. Man, what a wonderful passage. Can you imagine as Paul is traversing the different places where he's going in Asia and in the area where Jerusalem is, where Damascus is, Syria, where all this fighting and stuff is going on now, and eventually into Rome. Can you imagine as he tells the Gentile race? Now listen, y'all, everybody knows who are Jews. It is just, if you start reading the New Testament, I can give it to you. I believe it's Acts 15:33, where in a discussion about Gentiles having an opportunity to be saved, they bring up that Moses is read in every city. What? People have access to the law of Moses and the knowledge of Jews in every city? That's basically God's grand scheme, as he has made it so that Judaism, that the Jews, the Hebrews, different things they call them, are known throughout the world. And as these individuals are hearing this guy named Paul, he is telling them, Gentiles who were not part of the Jewish race, he's telling them this is as good as the thief on the cross, y'all. Now, let's just say, here we go. A guy in Geneva, Switzerland in the 1600s, he reads this. He's been feeding at the trough of a Roman Catholic named Augustine or Augustine. If you're with these guys, you got to say what they say. We don't. And so he reads this and he basically says, I believe this is actually saying that people who are not elected by God from the beginning of the world, they actually are dead in trespasses and they can't respond to the gospel. And his conclusion is that there are elected people that are going to hell. There are elected people that are saved without any knowledge, is just saved before the foundation of the world. And then there are other individuals that are non-elect, and they're these dead people, and they can't do anything, and they're destined to hell. And so, his name is Calvin. Calvin, what do you think that makes God look like? Especially given the fact that Jesus on the cross said what he said, and the thief on the cross was pardoned. What do you think, how does that mesh? That's a good question, isn't it? How does that mesh? This just sounds just totally awful to me that anybody. So can I ask you this? I want you to rumble around in your mind and ask yourself, who in the area is a Calvinist? Can I ask you to do it another way? Ask yourself, who isn't? Everybody's involved in Calvinism, with the exception of the Roman Catholic Church. Augustine was a Roman Catholic. So if Calvin got this, John Calvin got this, then did they get anything out of that other two? Could you ask yourself, why would anybody sprinkle a baby? They came to the same conclusion. They all came to the same conclusion. And so that's what was going on in the debate. Now, this guy from Arkansas came all the way up here to try to promote Born in Sin because he heard that we're one of the largest, well-known, now make sure you get all my statement, largest, well-known persons willing to debate. Now, there's plenty of websites that are bigger than ours, but there's not a lot of people that are willing to discuss, and that on television, phone lines open, and make arrangements for the people to come up here, offer to pay their way sometimes, house them. Look at this. Luke 12:48. But he that knew not and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more. Do you ever think about the people in the Old Testament that you're reading about that were not in a position to have the law of Moses, the information from God, dispersed in front of them? And when I say that, did you hear me just a minute ago? We said that Moses is read. Was that right, Caleb? Acts 15:33. So when they said that, you might say, well, you're contradicting yourself. You said he was dispersed in every city. But that doesn't mean that everybody had the same platform to understand it. They may come from a background where they wouldn't understand what was going on with these Jews. They may have come into contact with Jews that are just, they're individuals who are looking down on Gentiles and calling them dogs for no reason other than the fact that they have different laws in regard to food and hygiene. And so, you ever think about those individuals? How is God going to make provision for them? I mean, how is the judgment going to be? I don't know exactly how this is going to work, but I'm going to say this. What if someone else that we are working with, and, what if they ask us this kind of question? Look at this, Matthew 11:23. And thou, Capernaum, which are exalted unto heaven, this is Jesus, shall be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I say unto you, that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee. So, you're basically looking at this, and anybody not know what Sodom is famous for? I mean, you'd have to be not thinking to think, or actually not knowing words to not know what Sodom is. And that's what was going on there. And he said it's going to be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee. Where in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, among whom also we all had our conversation in time past in the lust of the flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as others. And what's happened? God's extended his grace to them. Well, Sodom and Gomorrah are not here. Now read with me. This is just something that I have written. The fullness of time seems to be the point at which the chosen to bring the Messiah refuses his Messiah when he comes. And that's exactly what Jesus is talking about. The Jews are having this great opportunity to receive what was prophesied in the prophets since the beginning of the world. If you're a person who likes to check up on what we're saying, you could just make a marker and look at Genesis 3:15, and that would be the prophecy that Jesus was coming. Born of a woman. Jesus was born of a woman without a male. It begins in the very first account, very first story. These individuals have had access to that all this time, and then Jesus comes, and they don't believe they're prophets. And so, the Messiah reveals that those who are thought to be condemned are in fact being said would be willing, if they were here, to repent if they had the light that is brought to the chosen. And he also says, as we're going to see it in this morning, that the Gentiles are wild. Now, if you remember, Ishmael was said to be a wild man, prophesied that he would be a wild man. And we're asking the question, we're considering the idea and the question. They weren't here. And so what does that mean? Romans 11, verse 24. If thou were cut out of an olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were graft contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these which be the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? Now, y'all, this is, Romans 11 is the Ephesians crowd, okay? He's talking to Gentiles who are Christians now, who have been given the gospel. And they know that Jews are giving them a hard time, and in many places the Jews have actually run over Paul and are trying to exclude them. And it's a pretty big fight. And so he's reminding these Gentiles, he's saying, look, you got in contrary to nature In other words, you're those individuals in Ephesians chapter 2, 1 through 6. And God had a plan where he would actually get you in, and we want to make sure that you realize that he didn't just bring these Jews up to destroy them. They brought the Messiah. The folk that are following these scriptures, they are the seed line of the Messiah. And it's like, well, I just were using them to be an incubator, but I really didn't care about them. So I'm going to bring in the Gentiles, and the Jews are just going to be destroyed. No. He is actually explaining how it is that God works. Now, that's 24, drop down to 30. For you in times past have not believed God, yet now obtain mercy through their unbelief. Even so, these also not believe, that through your mercy they also may obtain mercy. Does that sound anything like Calvinism? Individuals who were afar off, individuals who were dead, individuals who had been following the prince of the air, their conversation was just completely lust-filled in their flesh and their mind. And God is saying that is offered, salvation is offered to those individuals. But here's the thing, that really doesn't sound that good, does it? If it's only those individuals that lived during the time frame that Paul is preaching and the gospel going out, what about all these other people? Why didn't they get a chance? Verse 32, for God hath concluded them all in unbelief, that he might have mercy upon all. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. So, you see in yellow, it says, where have all been concluded in unbelief? Well, at the beginning of his letter in Romans chapter 2 and chapter 3, he in fact says, all are under sin. Now, here's my news for John Calvin. And this is one of the most despicable doctrines. And one of the things that Jeremiah said to Caleb is, I'm really disappointed in Caleb. I thought he would do a better job explaining my position. Oh yeah? You thought we brought you up here so that Caleb could actually do an exegesis on Calvinism? Listen, we brought you up here to stomp it, like to rid the world of it. Because it basically is saying, in case you haven't heard, Calvin says that your babies are going to hell. They're born wicked, they come wicked in the womb, and they're going to hell if they're not one of the elect. Now, I will tell you this. Jeremiah is ashamed of that part. Either he's ashamed of it, or now he's had a baby, his wife's had a baby, he's decided that's not as wholesome as it was prior to having the children. Don't know exactly, but I do know this. If you watch the interview that Caleb did with him after the debate, he actually flip-flops and says, well, I don't really believe that any babies are going to hell. All babies are elect when they're infants. So, 3:9. What then, are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have before proved, both Jews and Gentiles, that they are all under sin. So for 3 chapters, he's been basically bringing the Gentiles, the Jews that are amongst them, up through historical time, and he's been trying to set forth God's mind, how that he could actually forgive all crowds of individuals. And at the end of it, if everybody is failing to measure up, why would God give special place to anybody? Are you hearing that? Well, I thought the Jews were God's chosen people, and they're really the ones that are going to receive all the blessings. You know, there's blessings that they receive to be a part of the Messiah, be a part of the bringing of that in, and be the first individuals to hear the truth and to recognize what God was doing throughout all this time, and the prophets would explain that. And if they didn't get it, Jesus was explaining it. John the Baptist was explaining it, then the apostles, and then just going throughout the whole known world explaining the mystery. What is the mystery? Even so have these also now not believed, that through your mercy also may obtain mercy. Here's the picture just for a minute. Individuals who thought there was no chance for them find out there is a chance for them. The Jews who thought they had it all, basically the Messiah's going to come in, build us a kingdom, we're going to conquer the Romans and everybody else. They find out that it's not working that way. And so they're basically diminished for a while. And the Gentiles coming in is an opportunity for them not only to hear from their Messiah and the apostles, but for thousands of Gentiles that are now coming into the grace of God and hearing the gospel. Paul is trying to get them to realize, listen, we need you to be our evangelistic force now. The Jews were keeping the word up until this time. Now you are in their place. You've been grafted in. They have been excluded. And the question is, do you not think that God can bring in the natural branches just like he grafted you in? So don't be high-minded. Realize that what is going on is everybody's in the same condition. Nobody measures up. And God has always been planning to save everybody if he can. And so I don't know exactly how all of this works, but I do know this. When you start looking at the different things, in Ephesians 2:3, as we break this down, among whom also we all had our conversation. You know, one of the things that we sometimes have to do is we have to figure out what words mean. When you see conversation in the King James, you need to realize it's not talking. It's talking about a lifestyle in times past. In the lust, a lifestyle that is depicted by lust, hedonism, individuals who think of nothing but their flesh. Why do I have members up here? Well, if you're reading from Paul, oftentimes he alternates between flesh and members. The members of your body are your flesh. Fulfilling the desires of the flesh are the members of your body, of the flesh, and of the mind. Now, for those of you who are students here, you know that that's very important because Paul often arrays the mind, the inner man, the spiritual man, against the flesh. But in this particular instance, he is saying these people are holy. They're wholly given to lust in their flesh and in their mind. So there's no part of them that is, as Romans 2 actually says, that these individuals that don't have the law of Moses, they actually have the law written in their heart, and their thoughts, the meanwhile, bearing witness, their thoughts excusing and accusing every action. These individuals are not excusing anything. He's saying they're wholly fulfilling the whatever your passions want, and then whatever you think about. You know, our passions end up being the part of us that causes us to be inclined. You know, when you now some of you may not have a temper, but if you don't have a temper, then you know somebody that does. And if you look at them and you say, what in the world's going on with you? Well, from somebody who has a temper, I can tell you there's just like a lever that opens up, and it's just something comes forward. And if you don't work on that, it's a part of our passion. And some people do love this way. Love. We're talking about desire, lust. And they just don't withhold anything from that desire that they say is motivated by love, which you know how that goes. And the mind doesn't do anything to retard that. You're just basically, Peter says in 2 Peter, brute beast. Wow, that's kind of, I didn't write the Bible. But individuals who are like that, they're just kind of animalistic. And so, you know, when you talk about animals, are you saying what? There's all kinds of different animals in there. There's a dog and there's a lion. Some are ferocious and some are more inclined to just, you see what we're saying? Look at this. This is Romans 7:23. But I see another law in my members, the flesh, warring against the law of my mind and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. This is what God is trying to put into place for everybody, and that is that our mind Our spiritual man, now I don't want to create havoc here, but I'm about to get off my PowerPoint presentation and let you see what's behind it. And what's behind it are some scriptures that will help us as far as when we talk about how this actually plays out. And the reason we're doing this is because, it is difficult for persons who thought one thing, like being a Jew, and thinking that God had a plan, and you had it, just totally wrapped up in your mind, this is the way it is. And then you start finding out that, hey, these folk that we have been mistreating all of our, you don't have to mistreat everybody that's a Gentile, but we've been thinking less of them, and especially when they're eating all kinds of unclean food, and their hygiene is just not up to our hygiene level. So here is Paul dealing with this kind of mentality in the Galatian letter. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, now here it comes, if thou being a Jew livest after the manners of the Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? And what's going on here? The Gentiles have been taught the truth, the gospel of Jesus Christ. The person on the cross, individuals that have rejected, persons that have been living the way that was described in Ephesians chapter 1 through 6. These folk have been offered the gospel, and by Peter. Look at this. Did Peter live after the ethnic of the Gentiles? We have to get it in our head that sometimes words like nature are actually translated in such a way that he's only talking about the nations, nationality. And it's a tremendous study that we're going to do sometime in the future, because I'm convinced that people are not going to find out the array of different words, whether it comes to the Holy Spirit, the Spirit that's within you, that's just given you from birth. So did Peter ever live after the ethnic of the Gentiles? Acts chapter 10, yes he did. A great sheet knit at the four corners and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts and of the earth and wild beasts of the air. And there came a voice to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter said, I'm a Jew. For I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice spake unto him again the second time, what God had cleansed, call thou not common. Had Peter ever lived after the ethnic of the Gentiles? Peter is having to be convinced right here to go to the first recorded instance of taking the gospel to the Gentile named Cornelius. Now, and you'll find that in Acts chapter 10, and you find this whole account in Acts chapter 11, where the individuals who are the gatekeepers, and see, Peter has switched back to seeming like he's a gatekeeper now. And Paul is saying, what are you doing? I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel. I said to Peter before them all, if thou being a Jew livest after the manner of the Gentiles, what does that mean? All these dietary laws and things of that nature, they're actually moved out of the way. They're not, I'm trying to keep from saying the word authorized. They're not applied to the new covenant. And not as do the Jews. So you've basically been down here hobnobbing with these Gentiles and eating like they eat. And then what happened? Well, some people that are trying to keep the Gentiles out came down from Jerusalem. And what happened is that part of Paul that has been brought up from a little child kicked in, and his conscience began to get to him, and our peer pressure, and he ended up pulling back from the Gentiles to satisfy these Jews, and he caused a split, a big dissimulation. And when Paul saw it, he ends up rebuking him to the face, actually. Now, can I make a little plug right here? This is us. If we can't actually correct, then what's the world going to go into? We're going to be right back to Ephesians chapter 2. Somebody has to come in and say that, this doctrine that Calvin has brought on the scene, who in the world would have thought that could be like drawn out of that wonderful passage having to do with grace. Part of y'all going to hell and you don't have any choice, never did. You're elected that way. And the other part, you don't have to do anything. You just basically are elect. And if you get the gospel and you try to live a good life, that's okay. Well and good for you. But these other people who don't even hear the gospel, they don't have to hear the gospel. They're the elect. Man, can you imagine something more delicious for the devil than that? And these folk that are Calvinists, especially the crowd that we're dealing with, Jeremiah and James White, I wish you would look them up. Man, they brag about being Calvinists and being the elect. And then when you make one of them feel bad about sending his own child to hell, they switch their doctrine around. And it's like you change this at your whim, and we're saying, all we're doing really is introducing the idea for you to look at these passages and try to see, thief on the cross, what was being depicted? Was it for you to be able to sin all your life and then right on your deathbed pray like the thief on the cross did, and Jesus will let you enter into paradise? Is that the picture? And then when Jesus said, these people crucified him, I've never done anything like crucifying Jesus. The people that crucified him, Jesus ends up having mercy and saying, Father, forgive them, as Caleb was talking about this morning. They don't know what they're doing, and that's true. And so are you planning at the end of your life to just basically say, I didn't know what I was doing, and I'm going to appeal to that same passage or that information that I found in Luke 23. So here's our last one. This is Paul, and I want to ask you, what do you think is being depicted here? And I thank Christ Jesus our Lord, who hath enabled me, for that he counted me faithful, putting me into the ministry. This is Saul of Tarsus, in case you don't remember. He was an individual who was killing Christians. He was bringing them to Jerusalem to have them killed if they wouldn't deny Jesus, who was before a blasphemer, a persecutor, injurious. But I obtained mercy because I did it ignorantly in unbelief. And the grace of our Lord was exceeding abundant with faith and love, which is in Christ Jesus. This is a faithful saying. This is what he wants you to get out of it. And worthy of all acceptation, that Christ Jesus came into this world to save sinners, of whom I am chief, which should hereafter believe on him. I am chief. Howbeit for this cause, let me help myself here. For this cause I obtained mercy, that in me first Jesus Christ might show forth all longsuffering for a pattern to them which should hereafter believe on him to life everlasting. Now can I ask you this? You can do this, and I say you be doing me a favor. If you find anywhere even a hint that the thief on the cross was designed to be a pattern for your entrance into paradise, would you let me know? Now I know for one thing what it is a pattern of. It is a situation where a person that you or nor I would probably have pardoned. These guys blaspheming and throwing insults into Jesus' face while he's hanging on the cross, and one of them end up saying to the other, man, what's wrong with you? Do you not see we're condemned too? Don't you have any, we're all fixing to die here. And ultimately he turns it around and asks for mercy. And Jesus gives it to him. Now, that is a tremendous picture. Now, can you imagine somebody taking that and saying, I don't have to follow Jesus, and I'm just going to wait, and right before I die, I'm going to call on him. What are you going to say? When you come in your kingdom, would you remember me? Excuse me, that was not going to work. Jesus is already in his kingdom. And so I don't know what I do know what a person's going to say, because we've encountered some of them. They are just so sorry that they wasted all their life rather than give Jesus the honor that he deserves and then try to help him with other individuals who are like those people in Ephesians chapter 2. But Paul says, I'm a pattern. He showed me mercy, that in me first Jesus Christ might show forth all longsuffering for a pattern to them which should hereafter believe on him to everlasting life. Now, if Paul is a pattern and you ask me to do the same thing that I ask you, find anywhere that you could even get a hint that the thief on the cross is your prescription to be saved. Or that you can basically plead ignorance in today's world. Remember I said a while ago that is it called Chronological Bible? That Chronological Bible is a bestseller in Europe. And a lot of people say, they think to themselves, well, because there's people in the world who've never heard the gospel, that's them saying this, and God's going to be merciful to them. I think I'll hitch my wagon to them. Because after all, Jesus did say on the cross, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Really? Do you believe that people throughout the world don't know anything about Jesus, and there's no impetus for them to look at Jesus as something different than the things that they're being offered? This guy, Elflegard Smith, has a book, and I know I would slaughter it, but I'm just going to tell you in general. The book is, I don't know exactly how the purpose is laid out, but I do know the book is, he's doing lectures, or you can read the book. He is talking about people that have influenced culture. And so his first lecture is on Shakespeare. His next lecture is on Jesus. And his last lecture is on Darwin. And what do you think he's going to do in there? Very interesting. And so the very fact that he's doing that and has written that book, the idea that Shakespeare, do you think there's anywhere that Shakespeare's not known? Y'all, anywhere there's a university, Shakespeare is going to be taught. I mean, how many of you had to read some Shakespeare as a person in middle school? Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou? Romeo, what in the world? Why am I reading this? Because if you're going to be cultured, then your teachers wanted you to know about one of the most significant individuals in the history. And then Jesus, and then Darwin. Why Darwin? I don't think I have to explain that to you. They're teaching it in school, trying to get you to disbelieve that God created the world. That's him. Them trying to squeeze out the middleman, Jesus. So this morning, I wouldn't hitch my wagon to that. Why? In case you don't recognize this, I can help you right now. That green thing that you got in your pocket that says, "In God we trust," everybody in the world wants to get their hands on it. And what does that have to do with anything? They recognize that there is a country that has currency and it's backed by God. At least that's the idea. In God we trust. And the reason they want those greenbacks is because there's more opportunity with the God that you read about in the New Testament, who created heaven and earth and all that in them is, than any other note. Now that's a lot of backing. And so this morning, we're asking you about that pattern. All I was doing there is I was trying to get you to do what I asked you to do about the thief. You're never going to find anything about the thief. I promise you that. No hint that that's how you can be saved. But I will promise you this, and I'm going to leave you to it. You can find 3 different accounts of Saul conversion. And it's just, think about that. He said, I'm a pattern. And it has to do with mercy. You want God's mercy? You want God's long suffering? Have you ever hung anybody on the cross? Have you ever brought people to trial and falsely accused them? No, I've never done that. Well, you're in good shape. But here's the thing. Have you actually been a recipient of the mercy that Jesus came to show the world, and or the long suffering? If you're lived this long, God's been long suffering to you. Can I ask you this, just out of appreciation, just a little bit of appreciation, would you hunt up those 3 accounts so that you will know what the man who said he was a pattern, and he's been in this book all these years, God allowed it? He said he was the pattern for you to receive mercy. And you can find it 3 different times. Acts chapter 9, Acts chapter 22, and Acts chapter 26. Just that simple. 3 times. Don't they have a saying about, never mind, 3 times. So this morning, as you leave, 2 things to stick out in your mind. Who in their right mind would come up with a diabolical doctrine that says that when Paul is right in the midst of defining God's glorious mercy, long-suffering, his grace toward his creation, Romans 11 and Ephesians 2, who would come up with this diabolical plan that says, you know, those individuals that he's talking to, that depicts persons who are elected from the foundation of the world for wrath. Man, if you listen to these guys in Arizona, you'll hear wrath. I would just challenge you, get on YouTube and bring up the transcript and count the amount of times they say wrath. They don't care. They're all elect. So they don't care if they beat you down or you hear wrath 100 times in one lesson. And so, who could come up with such a plan? Well, the devil needs a plan to erase this one because this is real simple. If a person is willing to study that and say to yourself, I don't want to get off in Calvinism, and I want to be careful about this other one, what do you think you'll find? I hope you'll get back to me on that. If you have problems with it, understand what's going on, I'll be glad to help you. And one of the things that you can be sure about is we're not hiding our doctrine, and we're not scared of anybody who wants to have a debate about it. Because when you have the truth, that's just the way you are. You're ready to defend it, and you're ready to oppose a diabolical idea that came from the mixed up mind of an individual in Geneva that ended up burning people at the stake if they wouldn't submit. We're not going to burn you at the stake. If you go out of here this morning and say, I don't know about that, that's fine. But we do appreciate you for being with us. We hope that we spurred some interest in you. And as I say, if you watch our YouTube, Caleb and I have our phone numbers up there all the time, our emails all the time. They're there for you to get in touch with us, and that's what we want to do. We appreciate you. And while we stand, our purpose for standing and singing this song, you may be already moved way ahead, and you already know some of this, and you're saying, you know, I think it's about time for me to stop taking advantage of God's long suffering and go ahead on and become a person who is following this pattern so that I can start helping other individuals to access this very wonderful story in the right way. And we can assist you right now